Mm. Mhm. Claire, I'd love to hear from you how your personal journey, your embodied way of being in the world, and everything you've experienced has brought you to, um, bringing this 18-month journey through. What is it that you are bringing, that yours particular flavor, your wisdom, your gift that's flowing through as things fall apart to our people?
Thank you. Um, yeah, so I kind of feel like the kind of the intention behind as things fall apart, being this kind of supporting us to rebuild the muscles, our muscles to be able to compost the ways in which modernity shows up through us and through our groups, our change making groups, and any kind of collective endeavors we're part of. It feels like, it's the journey I've been on for many years and will likely continue to be on for the rest of these years in this lifetime.
Mm.
And so, this opportunity to kind of co-weave a container for others to kind of also be on that journey and to kind of weave into that all of the many golden threads that I've been blessed to kind of hone and develop and tug and follow in my own journey over the last 30 years just feels like a very exciting
Mm.
opportunity. And in particular, there's a particular kind of co-weave that I'm really aware of is this kind of intersection between sort of the inner and the outer dimensions of change and the kind of where they meet, that threshold of where they meet. And as someone who going back 30 years ago started a journey around activism, as a very, very angry teenager and in my early 20s, throughout my 20s, just the rage that would move through me kind of when I would look around and see the
Mm.
ways in which the world was happening and the injustice of that, and spending a lot of time living and working in the global south and studying, a lot around kind of the antics between the global north and the global south, and just feeling this kind of unfathomable rage and sense of injustice and longing to find ways that I could contribute. And, I look back with a lot of love for my younger self of kind of
Mm.
like, wow, the beauty and amazingness of that being the stage I needed to be in. And at the same time, the amount of naivety there was
Mm.
and lack of support from elders, from those that had already walked a journey around this, to kind of recognize my own role in it, And back then, I couldn't access any of the vulnerability and the grief and the young parts that rage were really in protection of and kind of expressing on behalf of,
Mm.
like I didn't have access back then to the tenderness of my heart and how touched it was by witnessing, the depths of suffering and the depths of injustice and just yeah, and so that's one lens, to speak of kind of how, the rage came through me actually in quite destructive ways. It wasn't an attractive,
Mm.
in some ways, it wasn't an attractive kind of energy for people to come towards and be moved by and want to listen to. It was a destructive rage that kind of was blaming. I was blaming people. I just needed it to stop, and in a lot of ways, my own internalized guilt was basically being externalized onto those around me. And, anyone that would come into my vicinity would be a target for this rage of the injustice and the suffering. And also just the ways in which, a massive turning point for me about 20 years ago was burnout,
Mm.
huge and huge amounts of burnout and many years of burnout in really very, very debilitating ways, putting me into bed bound for months at a time. And yet continuing with my activism in ways that just perpetuated that, and getting to the point of realizing that's addiction. To continue a behavior that causes you to be ill is addiction. And so that kind of propelled me into an inner journey that then allowed me to really inquire into my relationship with activism and trying to be of service in the world, and how realizing how so much of what I was kind of attributing the suffering in the world to was actually really ingrained in me, and that was the turning point of really recognizing that unless I kind of point the finger back here very lovingly, and start to kind of compost the ways in which all of the things that I, was at odds with and
mm,
feeling so angry about
mm,
were also part of me.
mm,
And then began, this dance of both, because they're not separate, the personal and the collective, of course, are not separate. And these times and modernity and power over have created this sense that they are separate,
mm,
and so much of what we're up to is this kind of like, how do we kind of support ourselves to start to experience life as not separate. The personal and collective are not separate. And how can we allow our beings to start to experience life moving through us in that way that isn't separate? Feels a very big part of what a thread I'm
mm,
weaving into the container of as things fall apart. I mean, another huge part that's kind of come in around my own experience that is interwoven into as things fall apart is interpersonal dynamics, and kind of again the kind of composting that needs to happen with our protective strategies that are so flavored by modernity, and the young tender frightened exiles that these protective strategies are trying to protect,
mm,
and
mm,
how historically how much you know the way that I showed up in relationship was so sort of shaped by that,
mm,
and the harm it caused, and the how unhelpful that was, and how dissatisfying my own relationships were, and how unhelpful it was within the groups, the change making groups I was part of. And so again, within my own journey of this interweaving the personal and collective, really, really composting the ways I show up in relationship, and that kind of takes me on to not just with humans, and such a huge transformation in my own journey has been making myself available to be in relationship with the other than human dimension and the more than human dimension, and learning, remembering how to attune in that way, so that my lens is becoming more and more less and less human centric and more earth centric, and soul centric. And this has been such a fundamental
mm,
reshaping for me. And as someone who had already, sort of 10 years ago, had already been holding a lot of group processes and facilitating groups for many years, I knew something was missing. It was
mm,
like there's something missing in how I hold space. Like I get lots of positive feedback and it seems to work in a lot of ways, but I knew internally something
mm,
was missing. And then as my own soul journey started to really deepen, and I started to my consciousness started to expand, to become more earth centric, it all fell into place,
mm,
in the, oh, okay, it's because I've centered myself. I'm centering myself as a human in this. And actually, the next stage of my journey is needing to support myself to become a vessel that is, able to empty out, to be available to this more than human power.
mm,
And that, the last 10 or so years has been very much that. And so that so sits at the heart of what As Things Fall Apart is about, this kind of how can we make ourselves available as vessels for this more than human power?
mm,
How can we befriend uncertainty, because that's what it requires? How can we befriend vulnerability and grief, because that's what the vessel needs to be kind of fabricated as.
mm, mm,
So yeah, this is just a flavor of the things that I'm bringing,
mm,
and just so excited to bring the various different ways that continue to kind of reweave me. And yeah, so excited that we're in this together,
mm,
alongside Madeline as well, and
mm,
others, no doubt.
mm, mm,
And just hope that the gifts that we're bringing are the right ones to
mm,
support the ones that come forward for this journey.
mm. Way, thank you.
Hmm.